Enrique. Although raised by Spaniards, he never forgot his own identity, heir to the chiefdom of the Bajoruco region of the island.
Enrique was a tall and graceful man with a well-proportioned body. His face was neither handsome nor ugly, but that of a serious and stern man. He married a native, a woman of excellent and noble lineage, named Doña Lucia. Bartolomé de las Casas.
The Spanish government created a labor grant system under which individual Spanish landholders were given village populations to use as forced labor. Enrique, his wife, and his people were turned over to a debauched young Spaniard named Valenzuela. They were at his mercy. The priest, Las Casas, protested.
In a more just world, Enrique would have been the master. Valenzuela viewed Enriquillo as a slave and valued him less than manure in the street.
Enrique complied with Valenzuela's tyrannical demands, for which he was rewarded with regular beatings and robbed of his last remaining possessions. His many appeals to Spanish authorities fell on deaf ears. When Valenzuela raped his wife, Enrique reached his breaking point. He and his followers escaped to their homelands in the lofty Bajoruco Mountains.
The Spanish came to call him the rebel Enrique, and those who followed him were termed rebels and insurgents. Although in truth they were not rebelling, but only fleeing from their cruel enemies who were misusing and destroying them, just as a cow or an ox tries to escape from the slaughterhouse. Bartolomé de las Casas.
Enrique organized his people. Women, children, and elderly were sent into caves high in the mountains, where they raised chickens and cultivated gardens to feed the resistance army. Scouts were posted on every crag and pass. Heavy boulders rolled into place above the footpaths. Enrique instructed his men to fight only in self-defense, to kill Spaniards only in the course of battle, and otherwise to simply deprive them of their arms. At first, the Spanish army was confident they would quickly crush the Taino resistance. But Enrique's people, armed only with spears, iron spikes, fish bones, and bows and arrows, fought with fierce determination against the Spanish and their sophisticated arms. Time after time, they forced the enemy to retreat. During one fierce battle, Valenzuela himself was captured. But even this mortal enemy's life would be spared. Enrique ordered him released. As word of Enrique's victories spread across the island, many Taino fled to his refuge and joined the fight for freedom. His legend grew. It was said that Enrique never slept at night, that he himself patrolled the village until dawn. For over a decade, he fought Spain to a standstill. Finally, unable to defeat the guerrillas on their own territory, an exhausted and humiliated Spanish government made overtures of peace.
I know the Spanish very well, because they killed my father and grandfather and all the people of the kingdom of Sharawa, and reduced the population of the entire island of Hispaniola. I have fled to my own land, where neither I nor any of my followers are harming anyone, but are simply defending ourselves against those who came to capture and kill us. I need not talk to another Spaniard. Enrique, Taino.
But there was one Spaniard to whom Enrique would still talk, the priest, Las Casas. After many years spent demanding the king act to stop Spanish atrocities in the New World, Las Casas had been officially designated protector of the Indians. He now sought out Enrique in his mountain stronghold. 2 months later, Las Casas and Enrique appeared before Spanish authorities and negotiated a truce. 14 years after it began, the rebellion came to an end, but only after the Spanish agreed to guarantee freedom for Enrique's people. At the base of the Cibao Mountains, Enrique settled with his 4,000 followers, the last members of a culture that had flourished for millennia. By the end of the century, the Taino population that Las Casas had estimated at 2 million was officially reported extinct.
What does the name DeSoto mean to me? It means the personification of evil.
In the late spring of 1539, less than 50 years after Columbus, less than 20 years after the fall of the Aztec Empire, Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto landed on the West Florida coast north of present-day Tampa Bay. He rode at the head of a 600-man army, 200 mounted. They were supported by 100 servants, herds of horses, pack animals, swine, and trained attack dogs. Unable to carry the quantity of food needed to support the massive expedition, De Soto would feed his men and animals on the bounty of the towns they entered. The invaders came prepared to take their provisions by force. In July, De Soto struck north into the lands of the Timucua people, chiefdoms of fishermen and farmers scattered across the northern Florida peninsula. One by one, villages were plundered by the marauding army. Indian people were enslaved as burden bearers, chained together with iron neck collars in groups of 30.
If they were men of virtue, they would not have left their own country. They have made highwaymen, adulterers, and murderers of themselves, without shame of men or fear of any god. Timucua.
But the Timucua were people who also knew of war. As the Spanish army advanced, news reached one leader, Urrutina, who was secure in a military strength that had never failed him. As the Spanish force neared Urrutina's town, De Soto sent a messenger ahead with a warning to submit or be destroyed. Urrutina responded,
I am king in my land. I and all of my people have vowed to die 100 deaths to maintain the freedom of our land. This is our answer, both for the present and forevermore.
De Soto entered Irutina's town with his army in battle formation, but oddly, they met no resistance. The chief, who had promised such defiance, seemed to have completely submitted, but the surface belied the reality. While the Spaniards gorged upon the town's food stores, Urutina secretly summoned fighting men from throughout the region. Then, playing out a military chess game, the young chief invited De Soto to witness Timucua military maneuvers in a large field. His plan? To amass his army and launch a surprise attack on the Spanish force. But De Soto had been forewarned by a spy. Matching the Indian leader move for move, he brought his army to the field in battle formation. To the rear of the Timucua force were 2 lakes. To their flanks were forest, and in front of them, the Spanish army. Suddenly, De Soto gave a signal. Urutina was seized, and the Spaniards attacked. The Spanish cavalry thundered forward, their horses' hooves driving into the Timucuan ranks. Outmatched, the Indian force fell back. Some ran towards the shelter of the trees. Hundreds more plunged into the lake nearby, swimming out into the deep water to evade their pursuers. The Spaniards fired into the lake, trying to force the Timucua to surrender. Indian resistors had to tread water constantly, but by nightfall, not a single man had yielded. A Spanish chronicler observed the agonizing struggle.
And now, they continued to torment the Indians, never once letting them set foot on the shore, hoping that they would become exhausted by the swimming, and as a result give up the more quickly. Thus, they threatened with death those who would not surrender. Regardless of how much the Castilians afflicted them, they could not do enough to keep them from showing their spirit and strength. For even though these men realized that they were without hope of help in the hardships and danger they were experiencing, some chose death as a lesser evil.
It was not until late the following morning that 200 survivors surrendered in a body.
They had been swimming 24 hours, and it was a great pity to see them emerge from the lagoon, half drowned and swollen and transfixed by the toil, hunger, fatigue, and lack of sleep they had suffered. Garcilaso de la Vega, Spanish chronicler.
The remaining 7 were dragged out of the water at knife point by De Soto's men. The Timucuan prisoners were chained and distributed among the Spanish soldiers as slaves. Urutina was imprisoned inside his own statehouse. He would make one last act of defiance. Pretending to have passively accepted his defeat, he lulled De Soto within his reach. Suddenly, he lunged at the Spanish leader, smashing his face with chained fists.
The chief gave out such a tremendous roar that it could be heard for a quarter of a league around. The blow was so fierce that De Soto was unconscious for more than half an hour, and he bled through the eyes, nose, and mouth.
Simultaneously, Urutina was gored by 12 swordsmen. Outside, the Timucua fell upon their captors, fighting with stones, pots of boiling food, anything at hand. The Spaniards turned upon them, killing indiscriminately.